Hi, this is David Volkov, and welcome to Challenging Your Hacking Skills. Some of the things we're going to cover is value of penetration testing, Metasploitable 2 scans, Metasploitable 2 risk assessment, prioritizing changes, some system hardening and results, and lessons learned before summarizing. Now, cybersecurity is extremely complex with many components, systems, and layers. It is extremely easy to miss a small detail that will result in a severe consequences. As a result, it's important to use well-established framework when conducting a penetration test to ensure that all details are accounted for. I personally opted for penetration testing execution standard PTES framework. It gives an extremely detailed step-by-step guide on conducting penetration tests, but it is also flexible where you can skip unnecessary or not applicable steps with the option to come back to them later if need be. I followed this framework on my attack on Metasploitable 2 because there was no open source intelligence or pre-engagement activities needed. I skipped all the steps prior to external footprinting 2.51 step in that framework. And the value of a penetration test is that it allows an organization to see what an attacker sees. If procedures fail to be followed in conducting the test or within the organization being tested, which results in vulnerabilities, the best course is to identify the root cause of failure and develop and deploy guardrails to prevent those failures from occurring again. For example, let's say technicians forget to close unnecessary ports when they're not in use by applications. Well, configure firewall to close and open ports automatically based on set schedules. If technicians that may use the ports work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., configure the firewall to open those particular ports from either 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or even better, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. After all, those techs are not likely to jump in and use the ports immediately at their shift start and may wind down 30 minutes before the shift ends. While the procedure may be to close the ports once they're not in use, in case those procedures are not followed, there are guardrails in place to reduce that vulnerability. We're going to look at different scans of Metasploitable machine, Metasploitable 2 machine specifically. Basic Nmap scan is a lot. There is a lot of open ports, a ton. If I had to guess, I would say most are probably not needed. The first thing that jumps out to me is the port 23 telnet port. This is huge, and while other scans do not catch this particular vulnerability, this will be the first thing I'm going to address, and I'll show you why. Next, we have NictoScan. This is probably my least favorite scan to run, but I do have a habit of using as many scans as possible, as some of them may catch while others have missed. Like the Nmap scan here. This points out that port 22 is open, which is not listed as a vulnerability on any other scans, and if it wasn't for the Nmap scan, it may have gone missed. The reason why I personally dislike Nicto is its use of open source vulnerability database OSVDB references, which actually no longer exists, but it does still gives a lot of useful information. OWASP Zap Scan. This took a while to run. In fact, during the running of the scan, the Metasploitable 2 machine experienced a kernel panic error and had to be rebooted. Not sure if the scan caused that or something else. As you can see, there is a lot of vulnerabilities identified. Some of them in orange, yellow, quite a few. We then have the Nessus scan. Again, there is a lot, and it took almost half an hour to complete. So as you can see, Nessus points out their top threats, and there is quite a few. If you look, most high vulnerability items will have some sort of remote code execution or arbitrary code execution flaw. Then we have the SQL injection flaws. So let's look at the risk assessment. Let's be honest, things are not looking good for this Metasploitable 2 machine. Now, the top one wasn't listed as a specific vulnerability, but because of possible credential leaks on port 23 Telnet, I'm going to assign it a high risk level. In fact, it is such a high risk to administrators that pretty much all administrators know to close this port by default. The next set of high-risk vulnerabilities involve CGI, Common Gateway Interface. It's essentially a web technology and protocol that defines how a web server interacts with external applications. As you can see, there are many vulnerabilities where CGI is enabled, which results in the ability of attackers to execute code on the system. This also results in a few other vulnerabilities as well. We also have the good old SQL injection vulnerability, and not so nefarious but possibly dangerous HTTP trace method is turned on. This is typically used in debugging and allows developers to trace code. If left on, this allows attackers to find more detailed information on the system, hidden directories, and all sorts of information they shouldn't have access to, which can be used to increase the chances of mounting a successful attack. Prioritizing changes was simply made based on risk severity. As you can see, this table has not changed. We used risk severity level to prioritize what we should change. When there are so many, you can also add in cost component and compatibility / legacy system issues. If fixing a high risk level vulnerability, for example, is going to cost $100,000 and involves approval from the board, which takes time, well, why not fix a medium risk vulnerability like this HTTP trace? That'll take 30 minutes and zero additional investment while waiting on that approval. If that is the case, you may see that medium risk vulnerability higher on this list than the high risk vulnerability that's going to cost quite a bit of funds and needs approval. For us, we did not go that route. Now, system hardening and results. So some of the proposed changes was going to be to review open ports, close Telnet port 23, update, upgrade, and patch the system if available. Disable CGI script and turn off HTTP trace. Anticipated results would be reduced attack surface, less ports to manage, possible compatibility conflicts or issues with the update upgrade option, patching option. CGA flaws would be eliminated and SQL injection flaws eliminated as well. Now we're going to see why Telnet open port is a huge vulnerability. Port 23 allows an administrator to quickly log on to the system remotely and manage it. The problem is all the information is passed in clear text. It's not encrypted. And adversary listening on port 23 will be able to see all that data, including usernames, passwords, and so on. So let's say we connected remotely to Telnet, and we have an attacker that is listening using Wireshark. Here we have Wireshark, and they're kind of sitting listening to the conversation between the administrator that logged in remotely and Metasploitable 2 system. They simply can select the connection, follow the TCP stream, and there you have it. You can see username and password that administrator used to log in, all in plain text. So none of it is encrypted. Big deal. This can be disabled using a few methods. One is a configuration file. Telnet here didn't have a hashtag, so it was active. I simply added the hashtag sign and it turns it to become a comment instead of a command. So it now turns off the Telnet stream completely off. You can also use firewall rules to close ports. Linux has a very simple and effective firewall, UFW, which stands for uncomplicated firewall, and it's also present on Metasploitable too. You simply enable it, and then you use UFW command followed by allow or deny, and then the port number. Some people will swear by IP tables, but it is a lot more difficult to use and manage for simple options like opening and closing ports. If more advanced port options needed to be used, by all means, study up on IP tables and use that. Here you see I turn off all traffic to Telnet port 23 and port 25. Doing that actually disabled all ports still, and using the web browser with the IP address of Metasploitable 2 machine wasn't pulling anything up. So as you can see, I allowed HTTP traffic on port 80 in this setup. Now you can see how powerful the firewall can be. This is before UFW was enabled. This is after. It is important to look at all these ports and determine if there is a legitimate business need and what sort of adverse effect there will be if those ports were not open. Turn off all ports that are not necessary. Use tools to set necessary ports to open and close on a schedule. Next, we're going to turn off the HTTP trace, which is a debug mode. You can see the file path we used and navigated in Metasploitable 2 machine with our Vim editor, and then we just simply type in trace enable off, saved, and that was it. This command here can be used to disable CGI module right here, and you have to force reload the Metasploitable 2 machine. I do have to say that this worked easily, and the Nessus scan turned out wonderful with all these changes. However, disabling CGI module using this particular command caused the issue where navigating to the IP address of the Metasploitable machine didn't load the web page, but actually downloaded the CGI file. It did not pull up the web page. I actually had to use the Vim editor to play around with htaccess configuration file to manage CGI modules and turn it off there instead. So if you run into the same issue, look for htaccess configuration file and play around there. Fortunately, I got it. Here you see the VPR top threats is down to only 1 and only 10 vulnerabilities after all the changes. Remember this. Here we have before and after. Before on the left and after on the right. Remember the VPR top threat after all the configuration changes had only 1 item. Before we had a ton, and we had all of these. Many of them are high risk. We have 10 vulnerabilities. Before we had 38. Most of these that are left are not risky at all. Here it was lit up in red, orange, and yellow, designating pretty high risk severities. Now, some of the lessons learned, ultimately, you have to know your assets, what systems you have, operating systems, versions, what services, what ports are open, and whether they actually need to be open. Test your website or database before putting it out on public facing IP. test your remediations before publishing them live. Some of my remediations broke the Metasploitable website and it would not load. So make sure you test things before you run them live. Use the basics to reduce attack surface: firewall, web application firewall, antivirus, anti-malware, etc. And then patch, patch, patch. If asked why your system is not patched, you better have an answer of it has reached end of life, legacy software slash hardware, hardware slash software compatibility, etc. If the answer is I forgot or I don't know, that means you didn't do your job. And it's not surprising that all these vulnerabilities remained unmitigated, even if there was a good reason why patching wasn't done. Because if you don't know, then you're not going to be able to mitigate those issues. Scan and address vulnerabilities regularly with patches or hot fixes, configuration changes, or some other remediation techniques. Even if patches are not able to be applied, those vulnerabilities can still be closed using other methods many times. So to summarize, we went over value of penetration tests and the framework we used. Metasploitable 2 scans, we looked at some of those. And then the risk assessment in the machine prioritized changes based on risk severity. Then we went through some system hardening steps and then showed the results and finished up with lessons learned. Thank you so much. This is it, and we will see you next time.